Coming up on Primetime Lawmakers, state charter school advocates clear a big hurdle today as the constitutional amendment allowing the state to authorize charter schools narrowly passes the House. The enabling legislation is yet to come. We'll have highlights of the debate. A bill intended to keep illegal immigrants out of Georgia's colleges and universities passes committee late this afternoon. A measure prohibiting union-only contracts for public works construction from being awarded in Georgia passes the House. Opponents say the bill is unnecessary. Democratic lawmakers file a bill to restrict vasectomies in reaction to several abortion bills. And early childhood education is critical in developing all kinds of skills. Here in Georgia, we have a lottery-funded pre-K program. Tonight, I'll be joined on set to talk about it with Commissioner Bobby Cagle of Bright from the Start, Georgia's Department of Early Care and Learning. If you've got young children or grandchildren, stay tuned for this. From Wednesday, February 22nd, 2012, the 23rd legislative day of the Georgia General Assembly, this is Primetime Lawmakers. Good evening and welcome to Primetime Lawmakers, GPB's nightly coverage of the Georgia General Assembly. I'm Scott Slade. Let's go live to the Capitol where Sandra Parrish reports the second time was the charm for state charter schools.
Scott, after failing 2 weeks ago by 10 votes, the measure to allow voters to decide if the state can approve and fund charter schools passed with 3 votes to spare.
After much work and compromise since the last vote, H.R. 1162 has been changed, and I support it in its current form.
Several Democrats and Republicans switched their vote from 2 weeks ago after sponsors of the measure added language supported by the Democratic caucus.
My slate board now has on it the 2 reasons that I comfortably ask you to vote for this version of 1162. There is a definition of charter going into the Constitution. And secondly, the issue of funding has been addressed.
The resolution was in response to a Georgia Supreme Court decision last May that ruled it was unconstitutional for the state to create charter schools and take money from local systems to fund them.
It would reassert a tool that the state has exercised for the last 10 years, along with local school boards for 10 years, to create a limited number of state charter public schools so that students can have a variety of educational opportunities to complement the system that we have.
But some House members are still not convinced local school systems won't lose money.
I understand that we're going to create a new category of QBE, is my understanding on this. But you explain to local people that QBE, what they understand is the money that's coming back to those local systems, is not going to be hurt. If we have an $18 million budget, you got to balance that $18 billion budget. Something's going to get cut. That pie is not going to all of a sudden grow.
QBE have suffered $1 billion in cuts since 2003. $1 billion. I would say let's restore that and then talk about making moves and taking money.
The resolution was immediately transmitted to the Senate, where we're told it could be taken up in the Education Committee as soon as tomorrow. A bill that would no longer require local governments to contract with unions for public works projects passes the House today, but not without much debate from Democrats. Sponsor Representative Bill Hembry says it would put all contractors on a level playing field.
I refer to this as the Fair and Open Competition in Government Contracting Act. It simply says that on government construction projects, bidders cannot be required to participate in collective bargaining agreements with labor unions. Local electricians, local plumbers, and other non-union contractors who live in the community and pay taxes to the local governments are banned from bidding on local construction projects.
Georgia's a right-to-work state. It's not a state that has a guarantee for union participation. Now, I just don't want to see this become a union-kicking bill that makes a 30-second political highlight. That's not right, because there is not a city or county in this state that anybody in here can come up and say this small businessman lost this opportunity because of a union. That's just not true.
And again, that bill passed and now goes to the Senate. Late this afternoon, the Senate Judiciary Committee passed a bill that prohibits illegal immigrants from attending Georgia's public colleges and universities. The measure by Senator Barry Loudermilk would classify it as a state public benefit that only legal citizens are entitled to.
Our colleges and universities are here for American citizens. They are a public benefit. We want to ensure that our citizens of this nation and this state are the ones that are attending the universities. I think by clarifying the original intent of our legislation, will make it perfectly clear. Our colleges and universities are here for those who are U.S. citizens, but also legally in this country, because we do have a lot of immigrants that come to the United States. They want to come to our colleges, and they've done it through a legal fashion.
University System Chancellor Hank Huckabee defended a plan put in place by the Board of Regents this fall that prohibits undocumented students at the state's 5 largest colleges and requires them to pay 3 times the tuition to attend the state's other schools.
We feel that this differentiation assures that no bona fide legal Georgia student who is qualified to go to school is denied admissions to one of our institutions. There is no evidence that any student has been denied admission who is a legal resident of Georgia has been denied admission who was otherwise eligible.
Now, the measure passed out of committee and now heads to the Senate Rules Committee. Scott?
Thanks very much, Sandra. At issue again today, Georgia's Return to Play Act, a bill requiring the State Board of Education to develop mandatory guidelines for educating people about the nature and risks of concussions sustained in school sports. Some felt, however, that certain provisions of the bill impose too much liability on local athletic organizations and school boards. The committee voted on provisions that could remove some of that liability. Also, organizations which provide youth athletic activities will be required to provide concussion-related information to youth athletes and parents. The bill passed this afternoon by substitute in the House Health and Human Services Committee and now moves on to the House. Well, could there be more water coming to Atlanta? Not from the weekend storms forecasted, but from a neighboring state. The Senate Committee on Natural Resources and the Environment met today to discuss a bill that would allow water withdrawals from a portion of the Tennessee River Basin near northwest Georgia. Bill sponsor Senator Jeff Mullis said this would allow Georgia to transfer and retain water in local reservoirs for future use in the Atlanta metro area and northern parts of the state. The committee did not vote, and further discussion on the legislation is scheduled for next week. Of course, no matter what the Georgia General Assembly does, Tennessee would have to agree to allow access. Well, the Senate today passed a bill that provides more transparency in the use of special local option sales tax dollars. Counties and municipalities will be required to publish how the funds are being used and the status of those projects. The bill sponsor, Senator William Ligon, explains.
When we're publishing Forest Splost, it requires that you include an estimate of the maintenance cost of the project once it's completed. That's so that the taxpayers would know how much it's going to cost in taxpayer funds to maintain that project. Also, each year there's a requirement that certain publications be made dealing with the ongoing SPLOST, and this would require an advertisement of any excess proceeds which have not been expended on the project, the estimated completion date, and the actual completion cost of the project.
That information would have to be published in the local legal organ and on the county's website if they have one. Horses in the state will soon be able to trot more comfortably. Senator Jeff Mullis brings forth the bill to ensure that all horses will have shoes.
In Great Britain, in the United Kingdom, they have made it a law that in order to, before a blacksmith, a farrier, puts a horseshoe on a horse, that they have to have a prescription from a veterinarian. So that has driven the industry to nearly extinction. This simply says that you don't have to have a prescription to get a horseshoe. And to give you some background, are you aware there's 1,700 different horseshoes? I mean, I had no idea. I thought shoes, that many shoes were only in my wife's closet.
Who would have known? That measure moves on to the House. Well, the war over reproductive rights is taking a new turn in Georgia. House Democrats held a public hearing today to introduce anti-vasectomy legislation. The bill was just dropped yesterday in response to Republican-sponsored legislation that would make it illegal to get an abortion in Georgia after 20 weeks. Our Keosha Howard has the details.
House Democrats say the bill that would make abortion illegal after 20 weeks is an attack on women's reproductive rights and believe men should know how it feels to have their rights infringed upon. They say the anti-vasectomy bill puts the shoe on the other foot.
I feel that if women's rights are going to be invaded upon, the same respect should be given to the men in reference to a similar procedure. Of course, we know it's not the same in any capacity, but it's something. And we feel it's only appropriate for men to be put in the position that women are put in every year that this is proposed, of having the pressure of knowing that their potential rights can be taken away. Regardless of your sex, period, no one should tell you what to do with your body. We're all different. This is a very personal decision and one that the House of Representatives should not legislate.
Representative Doug McKillop, sponsor of the abortion bill, says he feels that the anti-vasectomy legislation makes a mockery of a very serious issue.
We're talking about the state protecting, life, pre-viable babies. If you look at a 20-week-old fetus, it is a little baby, and plenty of babies that are born at 22 weeks survive. And so I think that making light of the issue in that way is in poor taste, and I wish we could keep the debate on a professional level.
Representative McKillop says he expects his bill to pass out rather quickly. It's currently awaiting a slot on the House calendar. Reproductive rights legislators say they will do everything in their power to stop it. Reporting for Primetime Lawmakers, I'm Kiosha Howard.
The value of early education is well documented. So why does Georgia's pre-K program face funding challenges? Simply because it depends solely on lottery revenues, which it must share with the Hope Scholarship Program. Due to increased demand for Hope dollars and flat lottery sales, the state was forced to cut $54 million for the pre-K budget for the 2011-2012 school year. Those cuts resulted in reducing the school year from 10 months to 9, yielding a 10% reduction in pre-K teacher pay, eliminating training and experience supplemental pay for current certified teachers, eliminating 306 pre-K classrooms statewide, increasing class sizes to allow for an extra 2,000 four-year-olds to attend pre-K, and eliminating transition coaches who help students prepare for kindergarten. Joining me now to talk about Georgia's pre-K program is the Commissioner of the Department of Early Care and Learning, Bobby Cagle. It's great to have you in Primetime Lawmakers.
Thank you so much.
Now, your department oversees some of the most formative years. Early, from really the beginning to what?
Birth to 5, and we also do after school, which affects school-age children.
What's the biggest challenge for you and your department now?
I think it's, as with any other State Department, it is maintaining quality in the services we provide in the face of the type of funding environment that we have. We've been able to do it, and I think we can continue to do that.
Obviously, we're all interested in our children having a safe and a quality environment in these formative years. And your department has to police that, right?
We do. And, I think the first and foremost responsibility we have is maintaining the quality by assuring health and safety and the basic health and safety requirements that we have. We use as guides to monitor facilities and to help them improve quality in those areas.
Now, there may be good news in the FY 2013 budget for pre-K, but what impact will current cuts have in the long run? Let's talk about that for a second.
I think one of the biggest challenges that we have currently is the maintenance of teachers. We know that teacher quality is very closely related to the quality of the education that children get. So the cuts that we have sustained last year, which were absolutely necessary in order to maintain the viability of the program long term, really provided challenges to us as well in keeping qualified teachers. And so we think that this year's budget proposal that the governor's put forward with the addition of 10 days will go a long way to help us in keeping those teachers in the positions and teaching the 4-year-olds that will be the future leaders of the state of Georgia.
Now, the governor's made that a priority in his State of the State message. He wants 10 days back and all the other good things that come with that. Of course, that costs some money.
Yes.
Is that money in any question at this point?
At this point, the hearings that we've had have been very supportive. There, of course, have been questions, as always, about the mechanisms that we're using to get there. But I think overall we're seeing a lot of support for the governor's proposal, and I'm very optimistic that it will pass.
Georgia lost out, Commissioner, $70 million in funding in the third round for the Race to the Top for Early Learning Challenge. $70 million. Why do you think that is?
Well, without a doubt, the system that was set up for that grant at the federal level was designed to favor those states that had an existing tiered quality rating and improvement system. At the time, Georgia did not have one. and I think that that really hampered our application. Although I would say that it was a very positive process in that we brought 60 citizens from all over the state together to talk about early learning, to make plans, and many of which we were able to do, just not at the level we would do with $70 million.
Let's talk a little bit about the police function of your agency. You have to oversee safety, quality, all kinds of things from myriads of different providers. You're talking about in-home daycares to, you know, these franchise schools to the biggest pre-Ks along the way. That challenge has been the subject of some recent newspaper articles.
Yes.
The Atlanta Journal-Constitution took a look at that. And do you have the horses and do you have the money that you need to enforce these state standards?
You know, I think at the present time we are using the staff that we have to accomplish the things that we need to do. We have enough staff to actually visit on a routine basis twice a year every facility in the state. And we have an expert, national expert in this area that's assisting us in a review of the entire system to make recommendations in the event that he feels as though we need those things. Present time, I think we're doing a pretty good job, although I do think that it is incumbent upon us to be much more insistent on meeting those basic health and safety regulations on a routine basis. And for those that cannot do that, I think we have to take serious action and make sure that they are not doing business.
Okay, there's the hammer. Let's go back maybe to the carrot instead
Sure.
of the stick. Your department is initiating a new quality-rated system that will encourage some of these providers to come forward and meet strict standards before they're ever asked to. Tell us about that.
Absolutely. This is a system that's been implemented in 27 other states at this point in time, and it is designed to establish standards around quality, which we did with a huge stakeholder group over 6 years. So these are standards by Georgians for Georgians. Then we actually measure the facilities against those standards and publish ratings. This is a voluntary system, but at this point in time, with a goal of 700 programs by the end of this year, we started taking the applications on January 3rd, and I'm proud to say that we have 400 programs that have already applied. This has a great potential to improve quality, not just in pre-K, but in every setting that we have from birth to age 5 plus after-school care.
Will these providers get a certificate, some other notification that they can actually brag about and say, hey, we met these standards, come see us?
Indeed they will. It is a symbol that will be very recognizable. We will be doing multimedia ad campaigns in order to be able to promote that, let parents know what to look for in the way of quality. And it'll be very much along the lines of what we're familiar with ratings for hotels and restaurants that will be easily recognizable for parents, and I think a great encouragement to facilities that they need to participate.
And they'll be able to look for that soon.
Yes, and those ratings will actually be coming out in 2013. We have a year with providers where they do not have to publish their ratings, and that is in order to get our system as fine-tuned as possible.
That's all the way through daycare, through pre-K. Let's look at some of those pre-K or K essentials that we try to maintain here in Georgia. It's a voluntary program, public-private partnerships, full-year, full-day programs like school, credentialed teaching staffs, comprehensive classroom standards, program funding. That's a high mark to meet, and we have to underscore the fact that lottery funds pay for this. Will there be enough room for every pre-K child in Georgia to get into a program in the next year?
You know, that has been a challenge for the entire nation. No state has met the entire burden of a pre-K program for their children. Georgia, over the past 20 years, has served more than 1 million children in their pre-K classrooms. And this current year, at this point in time, we're serving 83,000 children. That's approximately 58% of the population at that age, and that's not counting those whose parents choose other settings for them.
If you are advising a parent or a grandparent the best process to go through to ensure their child at least has a shot at a decent pre-K program, what path should they take?
Well, I think getting out and talking with the programs early, and I always advise parents not just to read about them online, but actually visit those centers so they see that the quality standards that are out there are the standards that they would have for their own child.
Commissioner, it's great to see you. Thanks for what you do for our state and for our young children.
Thank you very much.
We've got to take a short break on Primetime Lawmakers, but don't go anywhere. Much more to come as we bring in our education experts here. Journalists will join us, including Maureen Downey of the AJC. We'll talk about everything from pre-K to these breaking details on the new charter school amendment here for the state of Georgia. You got to be here for that. Welcome back to Primetime Lawmakers. Time for our Reporter Roundtable, part of the show where we tap our stable of the best political journalists in the state. Tonight, I'm joined by Maureen Downey, a journalist with the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, specializing in education issues. She's the author of the Get Schooled blog. It's great to have you here on Primetime Lawmakers.
Delighted to be here.
And we are in a news-rich environment in education.
Yes, we are.
Boy, I mean, if anything, it seems like that issue has dominated this session of the Georgia General Assembly, if you just add up debate minutes so far. Let's start with some of the things we heard from Commissioner Cagle just a moment ago in Georgia's pre-K program. Where does that go from here?
You know, I still think the challenge facing pre-K is that we have some doubters. We have doubters in the General Assembly to its value, and we have doubters in the public. And I think with lottery dollars being scarce and the increasing realization that lottery cannot support hope in pre-K at current levels, you know, I just worry about pre-K. I worry about people not understanding its value and not understanding its sort of return on investment. So that's the issue. I mean, I've even had teachers tell me they don't think pre-K is worth the money we're spending.
Really?
Yes.
But there are studies. I mean, there's actuarial studies that show the ROI, return on investment, for a pre-K dollar is astronomical.
Yeah, and I don't really understand why people don't believe those studies. I think when they go into pre-Ks and they see kids doing what they're doing, playing, they think to themselves, why is the state paying for these 4-year-olds while their parents work? You know, essentially they think the state is paying for daycare. You know, I think the message has to be put out there in a stronger way, the value of pre-K. I know that, you know, Stacey Abrams, the state rep, wrote a piece for the AJC Sunday talking about for, I think it was every dollar, you get $7 back. I simply don't think people buy that. I think people still in the state, many of them, regard pre-K as free daycare and wonder why the state's doing that, given that the lottery money is running low.
It'll be interesting to see if they can prove the preventive medicine angle on that. An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of remedial education later.
Yeah. You know, I think one of the problems is that the research is pretty strong that pre-K is very helpful to low-income kids. Okay. It is not as strong that pre-K has the payoff for middle-class kids, you know, who in fact in their homes would get a lot of that. So I think when you've got that sort of mixed research, that's one of the problems. So, you know, I do think that they have to get that message out there, and I think that now is the time because we are dealing with, you know, really a crisis in lottery funding for hope in pre-K.
Indeed, and we'll talk about the hope in just a second, but I want to get to the news of the day, and that's the House, the Georgia House, passing the charter schools amendment to amend the state constitution. It goes on to the Senate, likely to pass there. The governor is likely to sign it, and the people will get to decide.
Right.
All right, what does this really do when you get right down to it?
Well, what it does, you know, I mean, as I wrote today in my blog, it does, depending on your perspective, it's either a charge forward for parent choice and local control by parents, or it's an assault on local control and local money. You know, I think what this does is it puts the state of Georgia back in business of approving charter schools, a business that they got into against the legal advice of some folks, even in state government, and then the state Supreme Court ruled that no, they can't be in that business. So. By virtue of the state constitution. So now we are going to ask the voters of Georgia to change the state constitution. And I think we're going to see quite a battle between here and November. I think that the education groups, the teachers groups, I think a lot of school advocacy groups will come out in opposition to this amendment. And so I think we'll be talking about this amendment all the way through November.
Perhaps so. When we talk about numbers of state charter schools that are potentially possible, I mean, right now, there's not that many of them. Not that many of them came to be under the old system, did they? Well,
the old system wasn't in place long enough, and Georgia has been a little slower than other states to embrace charters, although I still think that's one reason why, you know, many states are in this sort of charter regret mode now. They approved a lot of charters, and now they've got some issues with fiscal mismanagement. I mean, Florida's dealing with that. Ohio's had some issues with that. They opened them too fast. There's not a lot of oversight. And so I think that Georgia has a pretty good track record. It speaks to the fact that we did not rush to open them. That said, I will certainly concede that there were school boards that were hostile to charter schools. I don't know if there's any more who are hostile to charter schools, but there were some. So I think I understand the motivation of the charter school amendment folks. I guess the question is, how much do we trust the state and this yet-to-be-named state commission to approve charter schools sort of from the towers of Atlanta for all over the state? Now,
this will not preclude local school systems from still chartering schools.
It will not, and local school systems have been chartering schools. I mean, that's why we have, you know, as many as we do have.
Right.
This will actually, though, give those charter schools that are rejected by the local boards sort of a court of appeal. You know, it's still not clear to me the funding of these new charter schools. The language was tempered a bit to appease folks who thought that the amendment was a runaround to get state hands on local funds, because local funds are increasingly is what paying for education. The balance is shifting. The state's giving less money to schools. The locals are being called to support them more. So, I have yet to see the funding mechanism for these.
Which is in the enabling legislation, the other piece of legislation that comes along after the amendments approved by the people.
I think that, that the fact that folks are wary is probably not a bad thing. So, there's lots to see yet on this amendment.
Okay. In the minute or and a half we have left, Hope Scholarships. That debate isn't going, it's going to be ongoing. Were you surprised at the reaction you got at your paper on the story this past Sunday on how the Zell Miller Scholarship was distributed geographically and demographically around Georgia?
Well, let me just say this. The reaction was so negative that I actually suggested that the reporters who did that story go in the witness protection program. I mean, I thought people were going to take clubs and go out to the street. People are so absolutely committed to and counting on the Hope Scholarship that the suggestion that we even tinker any more with it and that we look perhaps to broaden it to kids in rural counties. The Zell Miller Scholarship goes to kids who have good GPAs in high school and a high SAT score. That, in effect, has limited it to really the more affluent areas where kids just do better on the SAT.
There's more of those Zell Miller scholarships going to suburban Atlanta.
Right.
Okay.
And in fact, the story sort of simply pointed that out, and folks got really angry, saying, well, it's a merit-based scholarship and those kids have merit. So I am absolutely convinced that changing the Hope Scholarship to certainly a need-based component, which is what some Democrats want, is impossible. I think people just simply, in Georgia, parents have now become accustomed to the Hope Scholarship and they want it.
Have you seen any numbers that suggest that maybe taking away the SAT requirement for the Zell Miller Scholarship would allow it to be distributed more evenly across the state?
Well, I haven't seen numbers, but certainly there was only, I think about 14,000 people qualified for Zell Miller, or 17,000. Certainly if you just looked at GPA, that number would surely rise. Is the SAT the best component? I don't know. I mean, the SAT clearly aligns with socioeconomics. So that said, in poor counties are not going to have as many Zell Miller scholars. So, I think it's worth revisiting. I also think one problem with Zell Miller is that it discounts the kid who, got to Georgia Tech and had a 4.0, but didn't have a 3.7 in high school. So I think there's lots of ways that we can improve that.
So this debate's far from over.
All right. Yes, far from over.
Thanks for checking in. We'll keep checking back with you, Maureen.
All right.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
And that'll do it for this evening, folks. Thanks for joining us here on Primetime Lawmakers. Coming up tomorrow, a bill to make giving information on end-of-life choices on assisted suicide is going to be heard by subcommittee. We'll be talking about today's charter school vote with Senator Chip Rogers, the Education and Youth Chair, and Senator Vincent Fort, an outspoken opponent of state-chartered schools. That's tomorrow night. We'll hear what the Senate has to think. They take it up next. Plus all the latest news from under the Gold Dome tomorrow on Primetime Lawmakers here at 7. This program repeats tomorrow morning at 5:30 in case you missed any part. Next to GPB, it's Georgia Traveler. Join the Traveler team as they travel to Gibbs Gardens and Ball Ground, visit the Great Locomotive Chase Museum at Adairsville, discover Flat Creek Lodge in Swainsboro. Thanks for joining us.
This is a GPB original production.